Our next speaker is David McKenzie, who is one of those people that if you want a job done, get a busy person, because David is certainly a busy person. I've got a whole list of things here that David's been involved in, but I'm not going to rattle them off because a lot of people will know David. He has been the inaugural chair of the Committee for Greater Shep. You're currently chair of North East Water and a whole wing of other things. Without further ado, David McKenzie.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to Shelley and your team from Speak Up for organising today. And it is a really significant day. If anyone's looking at the agenda, Shelley has given me licence to go for a little bit longer than 5 minutes, so I'm not just hogging the space. Matthew has given you a really good overview of the socio-economic work that we commissioned for a start. The GMID Water Leadership Forum. We were established in 2015 in the GMID, which is where we live and work, our group. Our members include people from the dairy sector, from processing and from on-farm, horticulture, likewise, irrigated cropping and grazing, municipal partners, natural resource managers, general community and business groups. And we're community funded. We've raised our own funds to commission our own research and pursue our own advocacy on this in a very similar way to what Speak Up has done in New South Wales here. I'm the co-chair of that group along with Susanna Shute, who's our local independent member for Shepparton. Thanks, Tom. So I won't go back through the RMCG report that Matthew has touched on, but it was the first time that there'd been an independent look at what was actually happening as a result of the Basin Plan. There were mandated periods of time through the Basin Plan, and the MDB had to do their work, which is what they're doing now. But no one else had looked at this, and we were feeling the impacts, the stuff that Matthew and RMCG had picked up. We were living and working in these communities and trying to pursue our businesses across all sorts of fields of endeavour, and we knew that things were changing quite drastically, quite significantly, and no one was really helping us discern or pick up or measure what was happening and why it was happening. So that's why we did what we did. We got a lot of feedback about, we know there's impact, but there's global commodity prices, and there's this, and there's currencies, and there's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of things that are impacting on your region. It's not just the Basin Plan. So don't worry too much about the Basin Plan. You're in a dynamic operating environment. Well, that was terrific, but through economic modelling, what we did was specifically strip out the externalities and tried to narrow down, through economic modelling, accepted principles and peer-reviewed work, what is due to the Basin Plan and what is not, so it could be really clear that we had an evidence base to talk about what we were doing. And our work projected what a 2750 gigalitre plan would look like and a 3200 gigalitre plan. Thanks, Tom. Or Shelley. Matthew's been through the numbers, I won't go over those again, so on to the next one. What that work actually did was stimulate some really serious conversations, some new conversations in different areas of influence, and it actually led the Victorian government to commission their own independent look at the impact so far. They commissioned Frontier Economics and Tim Cummins and Associates, and instead of a GMID specific perspective, they took a Victorian statewide view of what the Basin Plan had impacted to that point of time. What they did was actually broadly reach similar conclusions to what RMCG had reached for the GMID, which was great secondary verification, but they reached new conclusions for Victorian horticulture as a whole. Shelley? Now this is the stuff that really was the big red flag for me, in addition to what was verified that we already had felt and had a good understanding, intuitive understanding of from RMCG. So Tim Cummins and Associates and Frontier Economics, again in peer-reviewed accepted economic analysis techniques, said at a 2100 gigalitre recovery, which is sort of where we are now more or less, they told us that in a repeat of the 2008-2009 allocation season, that there would be a shortfall, existing horticultural plantings in the ground, there'd be a shortfall of 110 gigalitres just to sustain what was in the ground at that stage once it got fully mature. So on to the next one if we could, Shelley. A 2750 gigalitre recovery, and this is with Victoria taking its share of the offsets and all the other things that were the checks and balances built into it. So under a medium case water recovery scenario, in a repeat of the 08-09 year, a shortfall of 193 gigalitres to sustain existing horticulture. That's 16,000 hectares of Victorian horticulture at risk in an 08-09 year. And just to be really clear, the assumption was that the water would go up the value chain. So that's no water for irrigated cropping and grazing, no water for dairy, and a shortfall of 193 gigs for the trees that were already in the ground, which is nightmarish. And of course, at 3,200 gigs, the situation's even worse. Thanks, Shelley. So if that doesn't keep federal agricultural ministers up at night, I don't know what will. So then we have finally, we've made a lot of requests about where did the water come from, and it's been really hard to get hold of this information. It's only been recently released really in the community profiles that have been published that Matthew alluded to before as well. But we've gone back through Claire Miller, who's helping our group out, now formerly Dairy Australia analyst, now private consultant, and actually mapped through the community profiles where the water was recovered from. Now up the back, if you can't see it, this is the long-term average annual yield, so the bigger the dot, the bigger the yield in each of the areas. And at the top, more than 25%, if it's a big red dot, it's a long-term average yield of more than 60 gigs and more than 25% of water out of production. And you can see that the water has overwhelmingly come from the GID and from New South Wales Murray. This is Finley here, Shepparton's in the middle there, and lessons as we go downstream, lesser into South Australia and lesser in the Northern Basin, of course, as you'd expect. So that's the first time anyone's actually been, that's the first time that picture has been displayed publicly. It was only generated last week. And that speaks 1,000 words about why certain areas of the basin have felt more pain than other areas of the basin. And again, that's a principle that wasn't easily accepted by the MDBA in the early days. Yes, there's pain, but everywhere's feeling pain. We're saying there's more going on in some pockets than others, you know, and it took a long time to build the evidence base to prosecute that argument. The other interesting thing that accompanies this, thank you, really quickly, how long did you give? Only joking. This graph that you'll see more of as well actually has mapped again for the first time water purchase versus on-farm transfer, so water recovered through on-farm efficiency works. And you can see at the left-hand end, for argument's sake, the GMID area, this blue water is water from water purchases buybacks. And the orange bit at the top is the percentage that's been recovered through on-farm efficiency works. Lower Murray, you'd expect less. Murrumbidgee's had a bit more, but you can see if you're in an area with a big red dot or a big orange or yellow dot, and you're in an area that hasn't had the benefit of much on-farm efficiency work, you're getting two pretty good whacks. Thank you, Shelley. So going forward, you might hear politicians and people at Ministerial Council talking about this Ernst Young report, the EY report, which is a review of the efficiency measures about the things that they could do to go towards not only the 605 of offsets, but then the upwater. Now, I think the biggest risk is that decision makers are going to rely heavily on that report because our analysis shows that it was deeply flawed. For a start, they used their modelling, assuming that they could buy a higher reliability entitlement at 1,880 a metre, which we all know is ancient history and it's probably never going back there. In the same paragraph that they used that figure, they said, given current water prices, it's a significant risk that we can recover within the budget. So they make the assumption, immediately disclaim it. Thanks, Shelley. Modelling of on-farm projects and looking at the impact of on-farm efficiency projects to recover water as a trade-off, they assume an average 16% productivity gain in every farm that does that. Now, that's a pretty significant productivity gain, and immediately again they disclaim it on the same page. If the irrigating industries, they'll suffer a net $330 million loss if they don't actually get the full 16% productivity gain. So they make these statements, they stand by them, disclaim them straight away, and decision makers are going to rely on this report. Thank you. Yep. I won't worry about the program cost. We'll go on, Shelley, just the last couple of pages. On to socio-economic neutrality. So the neutrality test, and the reason we commissioned this work, the socio-economic work, to prove there'd been a negative impact in the hope of proving that any more recovery would inevitably lead to greater impact. So let's have a good think about this. We all probably know the socio-economic neutrality test that's in the legislation is a willing buyer, willing seller, a one-on-one transaction. Next one, thanks, Shelley. And that's a deeply flawed assumption because that doesn't allow for the people in the supply chain and the communities who aren't selling their water, who aren't getting the benefit of an on-farm upgrade. It ignores the cumulative impact of all those small decisions, and it ignores the distributional impact of the people that participate in those programs. So I'm sorry, time to wind up. Okay, thank you very much.